Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we are here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Indeed, all of our shows now are at 10 a.m. Monday through Wednesday. And on Business Lessons from the Military, we talk about all things related to military doctrine, history, the methods of great military leaders, all applying them to our professional lives, how we can improve how our businesses operate and how we can do better as employees working in other people's businesses. And for the last several months, we've been talking about Marine Corps warfighting doctrine. And today is our final show on that topic. So we're going to wrap things up this year. Well, we're going to wrap things up this year, wrapping things up with Marine Corps warfighting doctrine. We've been talking about intelligence, the spy versus spy kind, for the last several weeks. And this lesson is going to very much summarize both the use and I should say, the function and the cyclical process by which intelligence is collected, disseminated, and used. And so we'll get our trusty PowerPoint going. Here we are. And okay. So you're going to see, I'm going to quickly go through the previous slides. There's, I think, 20 of them. All of these, well, first of all, as I like to point out, all of the shows that we do on the way to WOW are based on the 3 pillars of attainment. For business lessons from the military, we're generally dealing in the finances realm, in the pursuits pillar. However, there are times we'll deal with relationships as well as ourselves. So if you want to know more about the 3 pillars of attainment, please go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@the-way-to-wow, and there is a show on that topic. So we started out talking about the objective of intelligence, and then we defined it, and then we talked about the intelligence challenge. Okay, so then how to deal with that challenge. Okay, then we talked about the characteristics of good intelligence, and then the classes of intelligence and the levels. Okay, and last we talked about requirements and sources of intelligence. So now we're going to talk about 2 subjects. First, we're going to talk about the functions of intelligence. Why bother with it, in essence? On the military side, it can be costly, both monetarily and people-wise, to acquire intelligence. And as well, it can be very, very difficult. So although these days we don't have a lot of military spies in other countries, at least as far as I know, I can tell you that we do have assets in places from time to time, and they're specifically there to gather intelligence on our enemies. And were they to be caught, the best we could hope for is that the service members would be taken captive. The worst case scenario is they would be killed. So in the business world, gathering intelligence is rarely such a potentially dire function. However, and by the way, I'm not talking here about industrial espionage. That's a whole different subject, and I think hopefully all of us would agree that level of intelligence is inappropriate, we'll say. It's certainly criminal in a lot of cases. So we're not talking about infiltrating another business. What we're talking about is the gathering of intelligence from what are called open sources. I've talked about this before, so it could be reports that a company issues. It could be market appreciations put out by various analysts, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, it could also be information that's gathered and disseminated by the government or various government agencies at the local, state, or federal level. So all of this information is out there. The information itself is not intelligence, as we'll talk about when we get to the cycle of intelligence. However, that's going to be our primary sources. So there's probably not a lot of danger in accessing that, but there is certainly a cost, at least in time. And there may be a cost to doing the research as well. And I'm reminded, by the way, probably the best movie that I know of on business intelligence, so to speak, is Trading Places, right? Where the brothers who own the commodity firm hire Mr. Beeks, I believe the character's name is, to steal the crop report for frozen concentrated orange juice so that they have the information before the market at large gets it. And so that presumably would tell them what to do prior to the market opening so that they could, make a lot of money. If you haven't seen the movie, it is brilliantly funny. It stars Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. It actually, from the standpoint of how, illegal business intelligence works, it's both informative and hilarious. But again, that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is doing our intelligence or gaining our intelligence from open sources. So let's look at the 6 functions of intelligence. The first function is to support the CEO's estimate of the situation. Now, I use CEO in a somewhat generic term. It's whoever is ultimately in charge of the business. It gives the CEO the picture of what are the market conditions, what are the operating conditions in which the business is taking place. And by the way, if something is relevant only to a particular division or subsidiary of a company, so then it may not be, the CEO's estimate per se. It could be a vice president of a division. It could be a president of a subsidiary. It could be just, the owner of a store. Okay. But in any event, the first function of intelligence is to give the decision maker, maybe would have been a better term to use, an appreciation of what is the situation, what is the market in which they're operating, so that they can make decisions on an informed basis. Okay, the second is to aid in situation development. So I may know what the market is that I'm dealing in, but then what decisions do I want to make? So to know what's going on currently is good, but I also need to have a sense of how might the market develop and change over time. And that intelligence will then aid me in in deciding how is the market going to change, and in that context be able to make a decision. Okay, next. Okay, so provide indications and warnings, right? So these are indications, really, I guess is the best word, that something may be changing, okay? And a warning is something may be changing for the worse. Okay, so we see this with the Federal Reserve Board. Okay, so over the last roughly couple of years, they've raised interest rates from near 0 to over 5%. And during that time, Jerome Powell, I believe, is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So he would from time to time give speeches, and those speeches were, at least in parts, purporting to give people an indication of where the Fed might be going in terms of interest rate increases. Okay, they were providing indications and or warnings. Okay, so most recently, the indications and warnings have about interest rates have been that they're probably not going to go up anymore. And indeed, next year, 2024, they may actually go down a couple of times. That seems to be what people are thinking. So if we're a company, especially a company that relies on debt, either to fund our operations or perhaps because consumers typically buy our products using debt. Say maybe it's, maybe we're a home builder, maybe we're a car maker. So the direction that interest rates may be going has a profound effect on our businesses. And so one of the functions of intelligence is to gather data about what the Fed is intending to do, what the state of the economy is in terms of is it expanding, is it contracting, is it peaking, is it troughing, and use that information to create an intelligence appreciation that would provide indications for what's going to happen with the lending in the lending side of the market as a way to, again, support decision making. Okay. Fourth, provide support to enterprise protection. So businesses tend to be vulnerable to various factors. Okay, and let's talk about the home business, right? The buying and selling of homes is pretty heavily interest rate sensitive. Okay, so if we're in an uncertain interest rate environment, one of the things we want to do is perhaps take less risk than we might otherwise if we have greater certainty about what's happening with interest rates. Okay, and in that way, we protect our business. So if we're very unsure about whether interest rates are going to go up, stay the same, go down, okay, we may not start a large new housing development, okay, because we may get going on that development and then find that interest rates have gone up. People can't afford to buy the homes or buy the condominiums. And so now we've got all this product on the market and we're not able to sell it. Okay. If it's a rental project, so we may need rents to be at a certain level. If we're very uncertain what the direction of rents are, then in order to support the protection of our larger enterprise, our company, we may hold back on, building a project. We may even have the project approved, okay? And yet, since we're not going to be bringing it to market for, say, 12 to 18 months, we may not want to start construction and actually take on the debt that is required to build out that building because it's too uncertain as to whether the project is going to work out. Okay, so that would be an example of providing support for enterprise protection. Okay, then the last two are to support objective setting and targeting. So as we look forward in our businesses, and we're here at the end of 2023, and we're thinking, okay, what should our goals be for next year and maybe for the next 5 years? So intelligence needs to be gathered to give us a sense of, first of all, what's possible for us to accomplish over that time period. Okay. Again, so coming up in 2024, we still have economic uncertainty. It appears that interest rates have peaked and maybe will come down in 2024, but it's certainly not guaranteed. That's number one. Number two, we have a presidential election coming up. Okay. Are we going to, as a result of that election, are we going to see the current President Biden reelected and therefore presumably continuity of policies, or is the Republican candidate, the presumed candidate right now seems to be Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump going to be elected president again, in which case we would anticipate that there's going to be a very large shift in policy, at least at the national level. Okay, what's going to happen with Congress? Both the Congress and the Senate are very closely divided. Just a few seats, one way or the other, could change who controls them. So are we going to be dealing with divided federal government the way we are now? Or will one party be able to gain enough, seats in wherever they need them and also take the White House so that you have that party controlling those two levers of government, and therefore there's a greater likelihood that they'll be able to pass their agenda, right? That's a big unknown. So unlike 2 years ago when we knew for the time being we were going to have the same president, and although there may be a change in Congress, still, major policies probably weren't going to change, so we could be much clearer about what kind of objectives we would set, what kind of goals we set, and how we targeted them. Going forward, it's not as clear right now because of, among other things, the impending election, not to mention a lot of uncertainty in the international scene with wars going on in at least two areas. Okay, finally, it provides support for success assessment. So how do we know that indeed we are running our businesses successfully? Well, you may say, well, if we're making more money, then we're running it successfully. Well, that's certainly one measure. But just because we made more money this year doesn't mean that we're setting ourselves up for success in the future. Okay, so we want to be gathering other sources of data that that may be other ways of marking success. So, give you an example. Let's say you're well. Let's stick with the home building company. Okay, so while a home building company may have made a lot of money this year, let's say they also built a huge amount of homes, but we're already starting to see that home sales are really lagging. Okay, now interest rates did come down, so maybe it'll be great that they have that inventory heading into next year, because maybe next year, if interest rates continue to decline, they'll be glad they had that inventory because they'll have a lot of homes to sell. There'll be buyers out there who can afford to buy, etc. Okay, so intelligence can help us figure out, based on what our situation is now, are we successful in what we're doing? Okay, and it may not always be so obvious. Okay, so if I were a home builder right now, would I like to have a lot of inventory ready to sell next year? I'm not sure I'd want a lot, but given that the bias seems to be that interest rates are declining, I sure would like to have some inventory available. So if at the beginning of this year I made a decision to hold back on construction, if I'm coming to the end of this year with very little inventory, so even though maybe this was a great year for my company, I did well, selling the inventory that I have. Next year, when there may be more opportunity to sell because of potentially lower interest rates, I don't have that inventory to sell now, and so that could be part of my success assessment, is how well did I set my company up for success going forward, not just looking back. Okay, so those are the 6 functions of intelligence from a business standpoint. I didn't go through a military example because I wanted to get right into the crux of the matter, because we have just a short time together for this show. Okay, so next let's talk about what's called the intelligence cycle. Okay, and there are 6 phases to the cycle. I'm going to go through them and then come back and talk about each one in greater depth. Oops, whoa. Okay. Okay, so phase 1, planning and direction. Phase 2, collection. Phase 3, processing and exploitation. Phase 4, I don't know why it's moving on its own. Phase 4, production. 5, dissemination, and 6, utilization. Okay, so that's, and it's a cycle. And by the way, and I think this is actually on the next slide. So, right, no phase is more important than the others. Okay, they're all interdependent. Okay, that's a key thing to keep in mind as we go through each one. And although they're presented in sort of a linear fashion, or a round fashion, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the reality is that sometimes we're going to be jumping between phases. Now, if we're starting at ground zero with no intelligence developed, then for the most part, we're going to go through the 6 phases in order. But once we start using intelligence and getting what in the military is called a battle rhythm, meaning a sense of the ebbs and flows of activity in the business. So then at certain times, we may jump over certain phases in the cycle in order to be able to keep up with the battle rhythm. Okay, so sometimes it's faster, and so in order to get to the ability to use the intelligence, okay, where we may not have time to collect as much new intelligence as we might do at other times. So we may use the data we've already collected to do a new appreciation of where we're at, okay, in order to quickly get to something usable. It really depends on the circumstances. All right, so now let's go through the 6 phases. First of all, planning and direction. So planning and direction, well, direction is typically going to come from the person or people who are using or going to be using the intelligence. Okay, so they're going to direct. This is what I need to figure out. These are the decisions I need to make. These are the issues I need to be informed about. And then working with whoever's in charge of the overall gathering and processing of intelligence, okay? So that they'll plan out what needs to be done, okay? And part of the planning is making sure that the cycle can be got through in a timely basis, so that when the intelligence is needed, it's there and available to create the situational awareness and facilitate the making of the decisions that the person who's directing the whole intelligence cycle needs to have. Okay, and the planning and the direction are to a large extent going to set the tone for the rest of the phases, okay? Especially when it comes again to timing, which is typically a crucial factor in all of this. If we had unlimited time to make decisions, so then presumably we could, collect data forever, okay? But that's never the case. So what we need to do is look at the intelligence cycle through the lens of what do I need when. Okay, so phase 2, second phase, is the collection of information. Okay, now I talked about this a little bit earlier. Well, I mean, in a previous show, collection of data is not intelligence. Data is not intelligence. Data is the raw material through which intelligence is created. However, in order to get usable intelligence, we need to collect not only the correct type of data, but also the correct amount of data. Okay, and we also want to consider typically multiple sources. So if we're collecting data from only one source, we are typically creating some kind of blind spot, because whatever biases that data collector or data aggregator has are now built into our intelligence. Whereas if we collect data from numerous sources, okay, that we're much more likely to avoid blind spots, okay, because people typically have different kinds of biases and blind spots, And so if we're gathering from several sources, we're more likely to have one source would fill in the blind spot that another source has, et cetera. Okay, so that's and we tend to think about, well, government data is the best data because it's not influenced by what any particular business wants or things like that. That may be true, although frankly not always. But the data that the government gathers can have its own set of blind spots. Okay, and so having government data, industry data, that oftentimes is a good way to go. Okay, by the way, government data, industry data, and data from nonprofits, but like think tanks and organizations. Okay, depending on where they got their data, right, can give you even a third perspective. Okay, now sometimes think tanks, et cetera, rely on government data in order to do their appreciations, but other times they're gathering data themselves. So, for example, the Pew Institute, they do their own surveys often. Okay, Gallup does their own surveys. Okay, they may use government data too. They may use industry data, but they're also gathering their own. So that gives us a multiplicity of sources from which to collect our data. Okay, third phase, processing and exploitation. So this is the phase in which the raw data is turned into intelligence. Okay, so it's correlated and it's synthesized into something that's usable for the person who needs the intelligence in order for them to make their decisions or gain their understanding of the marketplace, of the business cycle, et cetera. Okay, so until data is processed, it's not actually intelligence yet. It's just raw data. Now, raw data is fine, okay, but typically it's not going to facilitate the best decision making. Okay, so the processing of the data is crucial, and it will oftentimes it will include not only the synthesization of the data, but also the turning it into its most usable form. So, for example, a written report can be fine, but it may not be the most usable form. It may be better to create some graphs, some charts, because that conveys the information better, more quickly, more vividly. Okay, so the processing has to deal with not just the synthesization, but also with how it can best be communicated. Okay, that's the exploitation side of it. So it's all good and well to turn data into intelligence, but it needs to be done so in a way where it can actually be used most effectively, i.e. exploited. Okay. Phase 4, production. Okay. In the production phase, we're now going to produce the intelligence product. So it may be a report. It may be some kind of presentation. Okay. It may be, by the way, a database, as you'll see in a minute when we talk about dissemination. It depends how the intelligence is going to be disseminated. Okay. So the production is the taking of the processed and exploited data and turning it into the kinds of products that the people who need the intelligence can use most effectively. So maybe it's a PowerPoint with a series of graphs and charts that they can not only that they can go through slowly, maybe initially, but then once they familiarize themselves with it, they kind of have it at their fingertips so that if they need to go back and review something, they can quickly go back. Okay, and maybe it has, kind of a one slide with a table of contents, and it's, slide one X, slide, two Y, slide three Z, or whatever. And so they can quickly link that, and maybe even it's hyperlinked. So you click on, slide three, bang, now you're at slide three. Okay, yeah, great. Just quick review, and I'm good to go in terms of making my decisions or keeping my situational, my market awareness up to date. Okay, fine. Next, fifth phase is dissemination. So we can produce the greatest intelligence in the world, unless it's disseminated to the users. Who cares, right? It means nothing. I mean, it may have been, a lot of fun researching it and putting it together, but if it's not disseminated, it can't be used. There's basically two ways to disseminate data: to push it and to pull it. So when we talk about pushing intelligence, it means we actively send out to the users the intelligence we produced. Okay? To pull intelligence means we put the intelligence in a place where people who need it can go and get it when they want it, maybe some kind of database. Okay? And it may be, by the way, it may be some kind of passcode protected database, so only certain people have access to it, or it may be something that's put on, a company's share drive so that everybody can see it. Okay, it depends how sensitive the intelligence is. Okay, but generally speaking, intelligence is either going to be pushed or made available to pull, depending on why the intelligence is needed, who needs it, how many people need it, okay, and also how sensitive it is to people outside the organization, or even to people inside the organization broadly having access to it, how sensitive the data is. If it's something that's very, very sensitive, so it may be set up in a database that's passcoded, that's virtually impossible to be hacked into, and then only those limited number of people who really need access to it will have the ability to get it. Okay. On the other hand, it may be something that needs to be broadly disseminated in the company, and so it goes out in a blast email into everybody's email boxes, and everybody has it. Okay. And then finally, there's utilization. Okay. In the end, we can create intelligence, we can disseminate it, but what's the point unless we're going to use it? Okay, so you may be tempted to think, well, so then utilization is the most important phase. The sixth phase is the ultimate phase, except that you can't get to the sixth phase without the other five, right? So, but in the end, there's no point in creating and disseminating intelligence if it's not going to be used. Okay, so and then this takes us back again to the planning and direction. The intelligence should be directed and planned based on what it's going to be used for. So you see why these connect. Okay, and the reason it's a cycle is because sometimes we'll go through the six phases, we'll get to the utilization, and we'll realize, oh, wait a minute, this aspect is missing, or we looked at it, but this doesn't seem to comport with what we're seeing. We need to take another look at this. So then we're not going to go back to planning and direction per se. We may need to go back to collection, or we may need to jump back to processing and exploitation, or even to production, because maybe we're looking to use it, and it's just it's in a form that it's just not usable for what we're trying to do. So that's why I said at the beginning, the phases are not necessarily linear. Once the cycle starts going, there can be points at which we won't, go through them 1 through 6. We may go 1 through 6 and then jump back to 3 and come back to 6. And maybe at that point we realize, wow, you know what? We misdirected where we needed to go. Now we're going to go back to 1 and go through it again, or whatever the process needs to be. Okay. And then we talked about this. Oops, I'm not sure what's going on with my thing here today. Okay, so again, no phase is more important than the others. Each one has to be carefully considered, carefully accomplished, okay? Because they are interdependent. If one phase is done in a shoddy manner, all the succeeding phases will also not be as valuable as they could have been, okay? So that is, and we're just a little bit over time, but that is the final show, not only on intelligence, but also on Marine Corps warfighting doctrine. So if you have any questions, any thoughts to share with us, here's some places you can contact the show. They'll be in all the show notes. You don't, if you want to take a screenshot, you certainly can, or you can look down once the show posts on our YouTube channel, and all of these links will be there, including some other ones. And then we have the legal stuff, which we do. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. So, for those of you who have been along for the entire, sweep of Marine Corps warfighting doctrine, I hope you found it interesting. The reason I'm doing this, of course, is I find it quite fascinating how the processes that we use in the military have almost a one-to-one equivalence in the business world, and that's what makes them so useful. And they also give us a sense of organization to follow. So rather than making it up from scratch, we can take Marine Corps warfighting doctrine, and as we've been doing the last several months, we can modify it for the business world and not have to, reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And so that's another reason why I wanted to do this for you, to show you that you can save a lot of time by relying on military doctrine that's been altered, as opposed to making up the doctrine for your company from scratch. So I thank you very much for joining me today. This is our show for today. And tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time, of course, is my show, People Making Money. And we're going to be talking about 10 tasks that you should consider doing for the end of the year, since we were just a little over a week away, a week and a half away, I guess, from year end. So these are some things that you definitely want to take a look at, and perhaps get done over the next week and a half or so, especially as things, well, sometimes they slow down this time of the year. Of course, if you've got things that have to be finished by the end of the year, they could be speeding up. But anyway, you want to have these on your radar. And then next week, we'll be back on Monday at 10 a.m. with Trusts and Estates Weekly, and Monday through Wednesday again, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time are the Way to Wow shows. So again, I appreciate you joining me for this, and look forward to starting a new topic on business lessons from the military next year. We're going to have some classic episodes next week. And then 2024, we'll launch our next seasons on all the shows with some new content, and I think some things that you will find particularly both interesting, but also usable and engaging. So again, thanks for joining me this morning, this afternoon, if you're on the East Coast, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And signing off, Marie, you are my bell. All the best, folks.